Hello and welcome to the Game of Growth. My name is John Cassidy-Rice.
And I'm Miles Cassidy-Rice.
And we have the pleasure to be your hosts for this session about acceptance.
Yeah, and before we do get to acceptance, we need to accept that we are going to talk about our wins of the week.
Hi, and I'm going to share mine first. So, without any context, my win of the week is I got to spend an hour on a bouncy castle.
And I did tell you that it was a bad idea to rent that bouncy castle, but there you are enjoying yourself anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. There's not enough play in the world, I think.
And my win of the week was that I got the pleasure to read and grade all of my students' assessments and also watch the videos they submitted. So that was really nice to see the work that they've put together from our classes this semester.
Yeah, especially when you're doing university level work. It's kind of like you're pleased that somebody reads it. So it's good to hear that.
Yeah, and it's really nice to see the ideas that come out based on the content that they read. So, always enjoy going through their work.
So I'm curious, we're talking about acceptance, and there's many ways we can interpret that word. So we were having a conversation beforehand, and you come up with a really nice definition of acceptance. So share that with us.
Yeah, so I've recently been reading some work by Zhang and colleagues around acceptance, and particularly in performance areas. So when it comes to acceptance, what we're really looking at is your ability to be aware, of the thoughts and feelings that are going on as you're performing. So you're conscious of those negative thoughts and feelings that are occurring based on some challenges that you're facing. But when it comes to acceptance, instead of trying to fight back against them and change them and alter them to be what we might perceive as more productive, we're just accepting them for what they are and allowing them to occur so that we can move on quicker and be able to move back into higher levels of performance without trying to fight ourselves basically and have that argument in our head.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And an example that stands out in my mind that I think may illustrate that is I used to play in bands and played in various different bands, from rock and roll bands to soul bands to blues bands, etc. It was always wonderful fun. And I remember one time we were doing this blues song and I had a solo. And in that moment, it's as though I stepped outside of myself and it was just enjoying the moment. I was there, every note was perfect for that moment, and then I had that thought, this is a perfect moment, and I was kind of back into kind of thinking about it too much. Is that kind of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, so this is this idea of flow, which relates back to that broader topic of positive psychology. The things that we discuss are ultimately trying to help us achieve this concept of flow. So that experience of everything just occurring naturally and you're just performing to your best, you're not thinking about it, you're not conscious about it, it's just happening. That's what we'll describe as flow. And what I want to do is try and help everyone achieve that experience more consistently, because sometimes we only experience them every so often and we're like, oh, I really want to get back into that.
Yeah, it's kind of a catch-22 sometimes, isn't it? You want it to be good, because it's like we're making videos, we want it to be good, we want to serve you as best we possibly can, and also enjoy having a conversation at the same time. And it's in those moments you almost have to think, I'm here, we're having a conversation, there's going to be mistakes, something's not going to go quite as planned, or not going to be able to pronounce a word in the way that we want to pronounce it. That's mainly me. And you almost have to kind of let that go, because it's actually part of the flow, I find.
Yeah. And that's where that acceptance piece does come in, because, maybe we slip up and make a mistake and we might start having those thoughts that we need to change it, we need to make it perfect. But actually, if we just accept it for what it is, then we can just continue on and move past that quickly. Whereas if we try to combat it, then maybe we start to stumble over our words a little bit more and we're stuck on the same concept for 20 minutes of this podcast. And
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I spent 20 to 30 years now, I spent close to 30 years now, speaking in public and as a trainer. And I used to be really nervous before I started. And I think that's my shyness. And the more I did it, the more I overcome that. And then I would enter into these sort of flow moments where it wasn't me training. I was there. I was part of the experience, and I was just communicating. And they're magical, those moments. And I really kind of did my best to sort of kind of work up into that situation where I could actually just speak, because speaking is not natural to me.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Was there anything in particular that you would do to prepare yourself to get into that state?
For a little while, I experimented with some rituals, which is basically sort of just clearing my mind and just being present.
Can I just ask, are they rituals or routines? Because rituals is a very dirty word to me.
Why is that? What's the connotation of rituals?
So rituals are, we're placing the power in things that we don't control. So it could be one that I see often with athletes is wearing lucky underwear, on game
Not
day.
Not washing them.
Well, I hope they wash them.
No, never wash them, because that washes the luck away. You just turn them inside out.
But every game day they have to wear the same underwear, and what that's doing is it's placing the power into that underwear. Instead of, if we develop a routine, then we have control over that routine, and we're giving ourselves the power to prepare effectively.
Yes, no, absolutely. I get what you're saying there, and I went through a period of ritual, and then discovered that actually the situation didn't warrant it.
Yeah.
So, and that can be very powerful though. Those kind of rituals, So I remember there's a story come out, and I don't know how true it is, but. We lived near Portsmouth and Southampton, and the football teams are quite rivals at that point. And they were building a new stadium, and some people working in Portsmouth apparently buried a Portsmouth T-shirt underneath the Southampton.
I've heard about that.
Yeah, and it may be myth, but it's kind of like that's kind of a magical thinking, isn't it? Is that?
Yeah. And there's a really great Ted Lasso episode, if there's any Ted Lasso fans out there, where he takes the team and they do this whole thing to get rid of this ritual because they feel like they have a curse. But I won't spoil it too much, but that's a fantastic episode. That's along the same lines.
Yes.
Because we want to give ourselves the power to prepare. We don't want to put that power into something else, because let's say that the underwear, for instance, disappears from your cupboard for some reason and you don't have access to that. Or then you're going to feel powerless heading into your performance.
Or you're going to have to go commando.
Yeah. It's a different topic.
Yeah, so I would admit that I probably did some rituals at some point. And but you're right, there comes times when you can't do the rituals. And then a routine where you kind of prepare your mind and body, really, for peak performance. So what worked for me, and I'm not saying this is the way to do it, is that I would skip breakfast but drink plenty of water, because I found that the digestive system would weigh me down. So if I ate too much, I felt heavy. So I wanted to feel light. And so I didn't used to eat in the mornings of training, just so I felt that lightness, but I would make sure that I was well hydrated and that I arrived in the room plenty of time beforehand and actually sort of limbered up and shook it all out. So,
Yeah, I saw you doing that just before this.
Shush, there's meant to be secrets. And it really is about just kind of just shaking things off so that I'm there in the moment. And then I would make sure that I greeted everybody that came into the room. So when I was speaking to 100 people at a time, that was a lot of greeting.
Yeah. So that routine of preparing in the morning, shaking yourself off, greeting people, that would be the routine that you go through each time. You have control of that, each of those aspects.
Yeah.
You can control that and prepare yourself effectively for your talk.
Yes, and I think routines not to be underestimated, because they give you space and buffer zone between setting up a mindset. So, and I think sort of that sort of transition period is really important, because sometimes if you find yourself working from home and you're working in your living room, and then you go to the evening when you're not meant to be working, temptation is to carry on, because you're in that kind of mindset. There's no transition from one stage of the day to another day of the stage.
Yeah, and stage of the
day.
day.
Stage of the day, yes. We're going to have to leave all this in after acceptance.
Yeah, So the acceptance comes in then when you're actually in that performance and things start to come up that might deter us from performing to our best. So I planned a little activity that I've not told John about for us to do right now and try out. So are you ready to see what I've got in store?
I'll say yes, and with a bit of trepidation here.
Okay, so I brought along a clipboard with a pen and paper. And when I say go, your task is going to be to write a sentence around your routine that we just discussed. So that's all you have to do. When I say go, you're going to write that sentence about your routine. Okay. Now, as you're going through this, I'm just going to be here watching you complete it. Okay.
Spooky.
So you really need to be able to focus in on writing that routine. You understand?
Right, I do.
Okay, ready? Go. Okay, can you write that for me?
Okay. I closed my eyes. I don't know why I closed my eyes.
Well, actually, what you were able to do there was accept that it was happening really, really well. Because some people will try to like move around and see the paper, and I'll be there like, yeah. But you just accepted that adversity in the moment. You closed your eyes and you went to write that sentence anyway.
And my writing is not that off what I'd normally write. I like that. That's a good example of that.
Yeah. So, if you were to try to like get around the paper, then we'd have that conversation around how we could accept in the moment. But yeah, you naturally demonstrated acceptance. Maybe it's just years of having all of your children do various things to you that you've become very good at accepting.
That sounds a bit strange, that one. So, yeah, and I think what we're really saying is that acceptance can be learnt. And the more that you accept a situation and go with the flow, and the easier it becomes. And I think I've spent a lot of time training and speaking in public, and now I accept I'm going to make mistakes. I accept, and in that acceptance, I accepted being myself much more. And the more I was myself, the more I connected with people in the audience. And that worked really well. So when it worked against me, I had a couple of situations where it worked against me. The first time I did some corporate work, I thought I had to act and be a certain way. And I tried to be something that I wasn't. And it just totally bombed.
Yeah, so in those moments, what were your thoughts like in terms of you trying to match up to what you thought you should be?
Well, I think I set myself an impossible standard, really, that I had to be perfect, I had to pronounce everything correctly, and we've established my pronunciation. And that I couldn't be... I'm going to use this term loosely, humorous. I like to have joy in where I train, and I found that in corporate situation, there was no joy.
That could be a larger issue.
Yeah, but then, and it's totally bombed, and I never got asked back to that particular company. But luckily enough, I did carry on working in corporate, and I found that the more that I was myself, the more I connected with people, and the more human the whole situation became. Because corporate work is about a group of humans coming together to achieve something.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's really important. The acceptance is about understanding that we are human, and as best laid plans sometimes never come to fruition, and that it's actually part of life. The mistakes are wonderful. So you may have heard the phrase, "There's no mistakes, there's only feedback," and so it becomes a mistake, I think, if you don't learn from the situation.
Yeah, and I also think that's a really great example of how sometimes the challenges can come from within us as well. I know it's very obvious to see challenges that might arise outside of our control or outside of our personal environment.
Yeah.
I think to athletes that I work with who talk about, the crowd were too loud, or there were people coming to watch that created that extra challenge for them. Actually, sometimes our perception of ourselves can create that challenge, and the differences between where we think we should be and where we currently are can create some of those difficulties that we face. So again, it's being able to acknowledge and become aware of those challenges before we can move on to that acceptance piece. So
Yes.
when we're talking about acceptance, the very first thing you need to do is start to build that awareness around actually where these challenges are coming from.
Yeah, they come from various different places as well.
Yeah.
So from self-talk, your beliefs. Beliefs, I think we act as though our beliefs are truths. And they're true for us, but they are distortions of the world around us.
Yeah.
So, and I think sometimes when we come to something called, what's sometimes referred to as limiting beliefs, they're beliefs that we're outgrowing, that we can actually start to go, actually, I'm reaching the limits of this and I'm ready for the next stage. And being aware of that, and rather than thinking that it's something negative about yourself, can make a big difference.
Yeah. So again, yeah, like you said, it can come from those different aspects, and potentially from your beliefs as well. So really building that awareness and being able to acknowledge when these things are happening is the first step in going through this. Yeah.
So what are some of the ways that you can build awareness around maybe when you're moving into self-doubt and actually stopping the flow, or moving into flow states?
Yeah, good question. And there's a couple of ways you can do it, but I like to start with outside of your performance environment, so that you can start to practice this skill before moving it into your performance environment. So you can do an activity at home with someone else. You'll need a second person to do it with, but all you need is a table and a ping pong ball. And what you'll do is the first person will bounce the ping pong ball on the table, and it can only bounce once on the table before the other person catches it. And they can't catch it in the table, it has to come off the other end of the table.
Okay.
Then the person that caught it will then do 2 bounces on the table. And you go all the way up until you've got 6 simultaneous bounces without making any mistakes. If you make a mistake, you have to go back to 1 bounce. And you just keep going until you're able to do 1, then 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and then 6. But every time you make a mistake, you go back to 1. So it's a very frustrating activity at times, and you'll very quickly start to be able to consciously pick up on what you're telling yourself, or start practicing that skill of being aware of what you're saying to yourself or what you're feeling. And a good way to do that is after you made a mistake, you can always write down what your thoughts are. So you're starting to journal as well what's going on. And then once you start to become more aware of those thoughts and you've practiced that, then you can take that to your performance environment. So maybe it's at your workplace, maybe it's a training practice if you're competing in a sport. And you can do the same thing in terms of writing it down, but it will come after the performance. So you need to take that conscious process of being aware of those thoughts or whatever might be happening during that performance, and building that awareness around it, and then writing it down afterwards helps you remember what's going on as you start to reflect on that moving forward.
Yeah.
And then after you've done that for a while, it's another mental skill that you're developing. You'll start to become more natural at it, and you'll start to realize, oh, I'm actually acknowledging this and more aware of this as it's happening. And at that point, that's where we can start to take the actions in terms of things like awareness.
Right, excellent.
Oh, not awareness.
Yes.
Yeah,
yeah, that acceptance.
Acceptance.
So I'm wondering, sometimes one of the things I teach a group to do to be able to relax and kind of be in the moment is to access peripheral vision. Have you come across this?
No, I haven't.
All right, so the idea is that we spend a lot of time in focal vision. And so that's where we're focusing. If you're looking at the screen now, you're probably in focal vision, we're reading. You can tell people walking down the street in focal vision because they'll kind of bump into things. Whereas peripheral vision has, in my opinion, been designed to open up the mind to take in the environment around us. So when we were cave people and we're walking through the jungles and there's something moving over here, we need to know it's moving because it could be food, or we could be food. So we need to be aware of our environment. So it kind of opens up the brain, and one of the best things to do for awareness is to kind of relax into that state. So peripheral vision does that. So how would you access peripheral vision? So if you look at one of us at the moment, and as you look at us, that would be focal vision. Then if you bring your awareness out, so you bring your awareness to take in the left side of the room, then the right side of the room, then the ceiling, then the floor, you probably notice that your breathing starts to slow down, and you start to become aware of everything around us. So it's kind of taking a moment just to be in the moment. Now, it's not that useful if you have to stare at us and then expand your awareness. But now you kind of know what we're doing, you can move into peripheral vision at any time. And I understand this is used in sports, so like football. Apparently, Wayne Rooney had impressive peripheral vision. Imagine going out into the field and knowing where everybody is and where the ball's going without particularly looking and focusing on. Because I think we spend so much time focused in and trying to pinpoint everything that we miss this kind of awareness is about the bigger picture. Would that make sense?
Yeah, and I think there's two different aspects to what you've just said. So one, I think it brings it back round to routines. You might have a routine of tapping into that peripheral vision to raise awareness in that moment, which might be situational, depending on what your performance environment is. You know, you brought up football. It might not always be appropriate to stop and really consciously go through that peripheral vision in that moment. However, there's that second piece where you brought in the Wayne Rooney, where as athletes, you'd actually need to go through different levels of awareness of what's going on around you.
Yep.
And we have these different dimensions of attention. So Wayne Rooney would have been very good at, when needed, being aware of the broader picture around him, using that peripheral vision to make judgments on where to then change his attention to in the next stage of performance.
Yes.
So there's two different sides to what you've just said. I think the one side where you could implement it into a routine.
Yes.
To practice this acceptance and bring yourself back into the moment, and the other side where you might need to shift between different attentional styles to be successful in your performance.
Yeah, definitely. Because if we take the Wayne Rooney example, out playing on the field, peripheral vision, so he knows where everybody is, where the opponents are.
Yeah.
But when got the ball, going for the goal, focal vision.
Yeah. Now we're tapping into.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that illustrates it's not one technique that works all the time. It's about being flexible and being in the moment and accepting what's happening.
Yeah. So when it comes to, after you raise that awareness around what might be happening, then one great way that you can start to practice that acceptance is through developing specific routines you might go through. You know, breathing is a really great and easy one that you can just do in the moment and just accept what's going on and then get back into that performance. And again, you need to be aware of the situation around you. So again, if you're in football, for instance, if you're right in the middle of that play, your coach isn't going to want you to stop and start going through that breathing routine in that moment, because you need to be performing right. But if the ball gets kicked out by the defender way off and across the fields and you have a few seconds to kind of regather yourself, that might be more of an appropriate time to go through that. But then again, if your setting's different, like if you're within the workplace, for instance, and you're at your desk and you're trying to perform there, you can take that moment to kind of recenter yourself and go through that routine.
Yeah, and I think practice is essential for that. So we talked about sports. Those athletes, I talked about being a musician. You spend hours practicing so that you're not kind of caught up in the technique of it, so that you can be in that moment. Yeah. So there's a lot we've covered a lot in such a short period of time.
And so just to finish off on that piece, just like your physical skills, your mental skills need to be rehearsed, and they should be natural before they're implemented into your actual performance. So we want that rehearsal to occur.
Yeah, and if all else fails, lucky pants.
No, we're not going back to rituals.
Okay, I might need to change.
Okay. Too much information.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so what have we covered today then?
So we started off talking about acceptance. We did some bouncy castles and we marked some papers, and then we moved into definition of acceptance.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I did not mark papers live on this podcast. That was done.
The winds of the day.
And we don't have a bouncy castle.
Wow. It's Christmas, you never know.
So we covered acceptance, and then we talked about flow, you're right, and kind of trying to reach that state more consistently.
Yeah, and again, we share some examples as well. So my examples were playing in a band and also being on stage talking to groups of people.
Yeah, and that led into our discussion about routines versus rituals and why we want to encourage routines over rituals.
All I can think about now is Lucky Pants. And so then we sort of started talking about exploring how do we access this awareness and what are some of the tools that we can. And to illustrate that acceptance, Miles pulled a sheet of paper in front of my eyes.
Yeah, and you done very well with the activity. So you accepted that moment and you got on with it.
That's because I trust you.
Yeah, and then after that we talked about how we can actually develop this through the routines, etc. And we used the example of vision and how we might tap into other resources to implement and accept in the current moment.
Yeah, and we touched upon because we talked about some techniques of moving into like peripheral vision and awareness, the ping-pong game, and they're techniques. And we talked about life being very different from that. So practicing and engaging so that you've got the techniques in place enable you to enter into the flow state. So it can spontaneously happen, but when you talk about skill sets, especially in sports, then one of the things that happens is you need to practice.
Yeah, and practice makes perfect. No, we don't expect perfect, but we want it to be consistent. So.
Yes. And accepting that the computer is going to turn itself off there, that's why I reached across. Right, so we covered a lot.
Yeah, and I think the computer has done a good job at forcing us to accept.
Yes. And I'll leave some of those in there so that
you get the natural experience.
So what are we going to be exploring next time? Any ideas?
So next time we'll continue to tap into different aspects of flow. I think that would be a good topic to stay on. How we might be able to continue to help us achieve flow, and different techniques and topics that might contribute to that idea of flow.
And is there any topics that you would like us to cover? Anything that you'd like us to talk about, whether it's relation to sports, and it could be very specific. Put it in the comments for us below, and we'll respond to those.
Yeah, and if you do enjoy our content, we would really appreciate you subscribing to the channel, so you can get notified when we release the next podcast episode.
And we'll accept either way what you do.
We're very good at that.
And until next time, thank you.
Goodbye.